he was shot down and left my mother, Tina Florence Schofield, a war widow. At the time, they had a daughter, my half-sister Maxine, who was just 5 years old. The son of Lewis, a butcher and builder, and Georgina Whittington, Jack and my mother had been teenage sweethearts from Lake and Shanklin on the Isle of Wight. They'd married in a chapel and went through most of the war together, travelling all over the UK. My mother recalled surviving a run through the blazing streets of Portsmouth, a sailor carrying Maxine in his arms. She and Jack had met at a local dance. Mother sang popular tunes at the time in a jazz band. Jack was great fun and a good footballer too. His death was a second great sadness for my mother, as she had lost her own mother, Florence, to cancer 2 years after her birth. My mother is a strong woman though, and despite what she went through, she has always had a bright, kindly, friendly and loving nature. My sister Maxine finally visited Jack's grave with her husband Colin 60 years later on the 20th of April 2004 at Schoonselhof Military Cemetery, Antwerp, Belgium. The inscription on his headstone read, "Just a thought, true and tender, of one we loved and will always remember." Maxine was a war baby, travelling the length and breadth of the country while my mother kept the family unit together as best she could. But she was now a war widow with a small child to support, as were so many, with the added sadness of having no mother of her own to turn to. But Auntie Maura, Florence's sister, gave her all the love and comfort that she could. My mother and her sister Mamie had been brought up on the Isle of Wight by their Aunt Maura and Uncle Charlie Baker at 195 Sandown Road, Shanklin. Their father was Johnny Schofield Jr. When I was born, he was delighted, as I was the first grandson. He'd had 3 daughters himself, Mamie, Tina and Yvonne. Johnny was part of the theatrical side of the family. A character actor, he played pantomime dames and had bit parts in Noel Coward's Blithe Spirit and old war films such as The Cruel Sea and Went the Day Well. In the latter, he died a hammy death in a churchyard. I like to think that I took after him in catching the acting bug. After my mother was widowed, the only choice she had was to go back home to her Aunt Maura, whom I also knew as Auntie Maura. Maura was like a second mother to mother, and was much loved by my sister Maxine, and they always remained close. A star of pantomime and music hall all over the UK in her day, she had been a petite beauty who sang like a nightingale. Later, she saved up threepenny bits for my brother William and I. In the evenings, she would sit at her dressing table, combing her long silver hair, before she handed us coins when we said good night. For my mother, being back in the Isle of Wight, where she and Jack had first met, must have been a sad experience, but also, ultimately, healing in the care of her aunt. Seeing all the places they had been together, even going to the local butcher, must have brought it all back, as that was where Jack had worked before he was called up. My mother passed some time during the late 1940s working as a hairdresser, being a single mother and in need of money, but her main role, as she saw it, was to be a good mother, and she was. She and Maxine were enveloped back into Maura's household. She buried her sadness and got on with her life. That's the way it was then. It wouldn't have occurred to her to be any other way. It seems to me that the generation who lived through the war nurtured great strength and spirituality, more so than many people do today. My mother first met my father, Cecil Clarkson Stewart, in 1949 at the Green Man pub in a little village called Hurst, near Reading, in the Berkshire countryside. She had made the trip from the Isle of Wight to visit her sister Yvonne Green and her husband Frank, as my cousin Louise had just been born. Later, during that same trip, when my mother needed a bath, Auntie Yvonne didn't have one, she asked Cecil if they could use his. He lived nearby in a house called Little Hinton, with his widowed mother, Frances, known as Fanny. Cecil and my mother stayed in touch after she returned, and before he eventually visited the Isle of Wight to be introduced to Maura. For a year they courted before getting married.